Interactive Service Hub is a different presentation method for Dynamics 365. As opposed to kind of the traditional scenario where you're displaying it through a web client, you're seeing kind of things in a series of forms and lists and views. Interactive Service Hub really focuses more on displaying information in a series of streams and tiles and more interactive baseline capabilities. Now, what's nice about this is where you really see Interactive Service Hub kind of worth its weight in gold a little bit is from a service perspective. And so you'll see that out of the box, a lot of the customizations and a lot of the things that have been enabled from a interactive service hub standpoint are specifically targeted at customer service. Now, the thing to remember with this is it is a very different visualization presentation. It's also a very different URL. So it's not the same URL that you work with inside CRM. And because of how the information is rendered and displayed, your interactive service hub instance is actually displayed, like I said, in a different URL, and therefore needs to be customized a little bit differently. It still uses a lot of the same customization principles and methodology that we've talked about to this point, but things like the forms and the dashboards that are actually displayed in Interactive Service Hub are different than what you would see from a standard CRM form perspective. And so if you are going to use the Interactive Service Hub piece for customer service, or maybe you're even looking at implementing some of your custom entities and bringing them into Interactive Service Hub, you do need to understand the subtle differences on how that information is customized. So in this module, we want to go ahead and just look a little bit at what is Interactive Service Hub as a whole. So a general overview of how it works, how to navigate it, and some of the baseline elements that are going to take place in there. We're also going to look at the dashboards and the forms, and so you can see what the differences are between an Interactive Service Hub dashboard and a form versus what you would typically see inside the CRM interface. Then we're going to look at what are the customization differences. So how do you go in and enable an entity to be able to be used on Interactive Service Hub? What happens to those individual fields as part of that so they can be filtered and used? And then we'll talk a little bit about what are the specific details around how do you customize a form that is going to be presented in Interactive Service Hub, and how do you customize a dashboard that is going to be used inside Interactive Service Hub as well. So as we talked about at the beginning of the module, Interactive Service Hub is a very different look and feel from your traditional Dynamics 365 interface. A couple of key differences that you're going to notice. First and foremost is it's actually built on the same framework that the mobile application is built on. So one of the things that's a little bit different is when you load up your Interactive Service Hub URL or your environment, it actually is going to use cached versions of the metadata inside your Dynamics 365 implementation. So if you do go in and make some customizations, one of the things that you'll notice is the next time that it loads up Interactive Service Hub, it's going to prompt you to download and update the metadata inside that URL, which is totally fine. It adds just a little bit of time to the load, but actually once the information is loaded up inside Interactive Service Hub, from a performance standpoint, it's very snappy and very speedy. Because of that, and because it's built on the mobile framework and it uses different versions of the data, as we mentioned at the top of the module as well, there is a specific URL for the Interactive Service Hub web client. Now you're also going to notice that Interactive Service Hub doesn't necessarily transfer over into the mobile environments. The mobile environments are still going to look at their customizations based upon the entity forms that are traditionally used in the web client application. Even though it is still using the same framework, they are going to render forms differently. It's still going to use the older versions of the forms. So if you are going to use Interactive Service Hub, you do need to remember that there will be unique versions of forms and dashboards that will have to be customized independently if you are expecting that information to be displayed inside Interactive Service Hub. And again, it's not something that's enabled by default for all entities. Out of the box, Interactive Service Hub is very much targeted at service-based organizations. So it's going to be things like cases and knowledge base articles. But if you wanted to have a custom entity also be rendered within there, you just enable it within the entity and then make a few minor customizations to be able to facilitate that inside the application. So if you haven't had an opportunity to use Interactive Service Hub, before I take you in and show you all the different customization options for it, let's just give you a quick little overview and a quick little navigational tour so we understand specifically what we're dealing with. So again, the easiest way to actually access it is through settings. So if you go into settings, you will see kind of towards the end of your area there, you'll see an option underneath application that says Interactive Service Hub. And this is going to load up the environment or your interactive service environment for your organization. Now again, depending upon how many customizations you've made and different elements around there, you may notice that it does take a little bit to download the customizations and throw in the metadata. That's perfectly normal, particularly if it's the first time that you're deploying Interactive Service Hub in your environment. Once those customizations have been made, if you're not consistently going through and publishing them, it's not necessarily going to spend a ton of time at that point, but you will notice, particularly the first time, that there may be a little bit of a delay when it first loads that up. So this is what you're going to see from an Interactive Service Hub perspective. Now, a couple of key things that you'll first notice is the views are very different. So this uses what's called a stream concept. So instead of having just a bunch of lists associated with items in the application, it actually goes in and uses what are called streams. Now, these streams could be tied to a specific queue inside Dynamics 365, or they could be associated with a view inside the application. Now, there's two types of streams or dashboards inside the application. There's what are called multi-stream dashboards and there's what are called single stream dashboards. And really the difference between the two is whether or not is how many entities you have displayed inside the dashboard. So a typical multi-stream dashboard allows it to pull in information from multiple entities inside the application, whereas a single stream dashboard really only allows you to pull in information from a singular entity in the application. Now, what's nice about this is I can see, all the different elements that I want to work with, and I can actually expand specific situations or work with specific elements of these items based upon what I want to do. And as I check items, I can actually do inline navigation as far as resolving this case, canceling this case, or even working with other options based upon what I want to do. So it gives a service technician or somebody working in here much more flexibility to be able to kind of navigate through. Now, this is an example for kind of a tier 1 service technician. If I were to come in here now and switch this, and maybe switch this to like a tier 2 service technician, this is an example of a single stream dashboard. So this is a dashboard that is specifically targeted at the case entity. So you can see that I have a actual stream of information that's showing me case-based information. I have a series of different charts that show me different items on this application based upon where the case came from, the resolutions. And then I have what are called tiles, which actually allow me to go in and work with specific cases or items based upon how I'm filtering these tiles. So these are all individual pieces of the application that I can modify and define based upon my specific needs. Now, in addition to this, and we're not going to get a whole lot into this from a today's standpoint, this is also where some of the knowledge functionality in Dynamics 365 sits. So if you're a knowledge-based manager and you're managing articles, you would be able to work with some of those items in here. We're not going to spend a ton of time on that today, but keep in mind that those are some of your different options. Now, the other thing that you'll notice in here is down at the bottom, you'll see different ways of viewing this information. So this is more of a stream viewed dashboard, but if I switch over here, I could look at it in more of a tile-based situation. So I could just see kind of a synopsis of what's happening and then work with the information from there. But you can switch this back and forth. The other thing that you'll notice is I have time frames. So again, I can define how I want this information to be displayed basically from a time frame perspective inside of here. So I can switch these to different time periods and it will adjust the data in regards to what I'm seeing based upon those items. The other thing that's really neat about Interactive Service Hub is I have this concept of interactive charts. So when I turn on these interactive charts, now I have charts in here that I can physically interact with that are going to change the data that I'm seeing inside my streams. So for example, if I wanted to see only the high priority cases, I could click on high priority cases and then this would go through and filter that information based upon the fact that they were high priority cases. Or if I wanted to, in this case, maybe look at origin, I could click on origin and now I'm seeing all of the cases that primarily came in from that particular item that I clicked on. up here, it shows me all the filters that are currently applied to this information. So as I'm filtering this information down, it starts applying the individual filters and adjusting my cases accordingly. At any point, I can click on these individual filters and basically remove these. So what we would be talking about from a customization perspective is how do you customize what this information looks like and how things are going to be presented from that perspective. If I come up into my navigation and I click on my navigation, here I can see, just like I would see inside a standard CRM implementation, my different areas. And so when I click on service, these are all the different entities right now that are currently enabled for the interactive experience. And these are pretty typical from a customer service perspective. If I were to go in and click on cases, this will open up to kind of my open cases view. Now, a couple of things that you'll see when we start talking about Interactive Service Hub specifically is if I come down here at the bottom, I can see an option here that says kind of dashboard. And so one of the things that's very different when you enable an entity for the interactive experience is you will actually have the ability to have a dashboard that is specific to that entity inside Interactive Service Hub. So this is one that has streams associated specifically with the case entity, and just like I did on the other ones, I could switch it over to tiles and have the same filtering experience that I would normally have inside the application. Now, the other thing that I can do is, again, I could go back to just service and I could go back to just cases and have more of my entity list view. And then just like I would in any part of the application, I can open this up and have my form. Now you'll notice that, conceptually it's fairly similar to what you might see from a form perspective inside Dynamics, inside Dynamics 365 web client, but it's a little bit different. They have this concept of what's called a timeline that shows you kind of all the different activities attached to this individual information. It also has a contact card where I could click on here and I could either send an email or create a phone call activity directly for this person from this contact card. I can come up to my business process flow and I can click on that and see the individual steps that are associated with my business process flow. And then each one of those different tabs that I would normally have inside of a form are actually displayed up here. And so I can more quickly navigate to each individual tab on that form just by simply clicking on those individual areas. Now, one of the coolest things in the area that I really like the most is this concept of this related area. So this is where instead of having a bunch of subgrids that are displayed like you would normally see inside the web app, this is where I'll have a related area where I can click on different icons that are going to pull up different aspects of this application. So this might be where I wanted to have, related subgrids or items from there. This is where I would be able to work with all of that. And so as you can see, it's a similar concept to what we have with traditional Dynamics 365 forms, but because there are subtle differences within them, there is a little bit different customization methodology that you have to keep in mind. So let's now talk about the actual customization process. So even though it's actually displayed in a different client or a different presentation methodology, it's still customized through the traditional Dynamics 365 interface. So you still are going to go into the web client and customize the application. So one of the first things that you're going to see is on the entity definition, there's an option there that asks if you want to enable it for the interactive experience. And so we'll go into the entity and we'll allow that to be enabled for the interactive experience. Once we've done that, then that's going to give us all of the different components that are now associated with it. So now I will be able to go in underneath my dashboards and I will be able to create a new type of dashboard called Interactive Dashboard. I will also, on the entity itself, have a dashboards option that will appear that will allow me to go in and physically create a dashboard targeted at that entity inside the interactive experience. And then finally, I also have my form functionality. And so when I go in and I work with my forms, I will have a customized for interactive experience inside the forms. So those are the three major areas that you have to look at when you start customizing the application. So if I switch back to my traditional web client and I go into Settings and Solutions, I'm going to go ahead and open up my loan management solution again. And so the first thing I want to do is this loan application that we created, I want to make this available for the interactive experience. So I'm going to come over here to Entities and Loan Application, and I'm just going to click on Loan Application so I get the entity definition displayed. And then once I do that, I'll see an option in here that says Enable for Interactive Experience. So this is what's going to basically give me my Interactive Service Hub functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enable that, and then I'm going to save and I'm going to publish it. And then once I've got this saved and I've got this published, now you're going to notice that there's going to be just a few differences on the entity itself. And the main thing that you're going to see on the entity is now you're going to have this area specific to dashboards that we didn't have before. And so now if I come into the loan application and I expand that, I will see a dashboards option. This is going to be the dashboard that is specifically targeted at the loan application entity, much like we saw when we were working with cases. So the first thing that I can do in here is I can now come in and add my dashboard. So very similar to what you might see from a normal dashboard, I have the same type of areas to work with, but I also have different types of streams. And in this case, it's a multi-stream dashboard because it's associated specifically with that entity. Now, in this case, I'll just go ahead and choose kind of a 2-column overview, and I'll hit Create. And then it's going to ask me what I want to work with. So the first thing that you're going to see in here is I'm going to just give this a name. We'll just call this Loan Applications. The first thing that we'll see is that everything's going to be filtered based upon this entity. So in here, it's going to be based on the loan application entity. And because this is an entity-specific dashboard, I don't have a lot of options around changing that. Then I can define what specific view I want to use to initiate how these items are going to be displayed. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to use active loan applications, and this is what's going to provide those individual elements as part of the dashboard stream that I'm working with. Then I can come over, and this is where that filtering option comes into play. So if you remembered at the beginning when we were first looking at it, we could filter things down and change time frames. This is how I'm going to control that for this particular item that I want to work with. So maybe I want to filter this based upon when items were applied for, and maybe I want to filter everything based upon this month. So I want to see any items that were filtered in based upon this month. Now I can come down and you'll notice I have kind of 2 different elements here. I have a visual filters element and I have a streams element. The visual filters element are really going to be the charts that I want to use to filter down this information. So now if I come into here and I click on these charts, this is where I can pick basically which chart I want to display inside this item. So this is where you would have to create specific charts and then kind of define what those items are. Now in this case, we'll just go ahead and use the one chart that we have. So we'll go ahead and click on Add here, and that'll add that visualization stream in here as a filtering method. And then I can come down into the streams, and when I click on the streams, this is where I can define what specific item I want to work with. So in this case, I'm going to look at loan applications, and I want to look at active loan applications. And it will add this as a stream for this particular dashboard. Now I don't have a ton of different scenarios in here, obviously, because we haven't customized and add a bunch of views, but this at least gives us a starting point that we would now have that could be visually represented for this item when we're viewing it through the interactive experience. So now I'll just go ahead and save and close this dashboard. And the next piece to this is your fields. So how do you want people to be able to interact with these fields from within that experience? So this is where I could now go into my fields on my loan application, and I could open up kind of any one of these different situations. So let's go ahead and let's find that loan type field. Here it is. And I'm going to open that up. And so now you'll see that because I've enabled this for interactive experience, this is where I can now determine whether or not I want this to be a field and sortable. So remember when we were talking about filtering things down and we clicked on specific items and it filtered it down? This is where I can actually add this field, so loan type, as a global filter. And now because I'm adding it as a global filter, it will now display inside that interactive experience as a filterable option. And also because sometimes we want to sort this information, this is where I could now make this a sortable option inside the application as well. So this is where I can now start defining specific pieces to these puzzles and determine if I want to be able to really dive into these individual elements. And you really can do this for any field that you might have associated with that entity. Now, the other thing that you will see that's kind of neat within this scenario is you can go into things like your status reason and work with individual items from your status reason, and these can also be reflective based upon those individual options as well. So as I add these different elements into here and as I edit this particular status reason, this is where I can use these to further define how things are displayed. Now, the other thing that's neat here is you'll notice that there's a coloring option. This coloring option can be directly associated with these records inside these streams. So at first glance, when you're looking at it, things can be color coordinated, maybe based upon the status reason, based upon the loan type. These can be communicated back out as part of the interactive experience, so people really have a nice visual representation of how that information is going to be displayed. So the first thing that you have to do after you enable the entity for the interactive experience is probably customize the dashboard a little bit, and then go in and physically go in and add any fields that you want to be able to use as part of the global filter experience, and as well as being sortable inside the interactive experience. The next piece to this is the forms themselves. So when somebody actually opens up the loan application item inside Interactive Service Hub, how are they going to interact with that form, and what's that form going to look like? So you'll notice that because I enabled it for Interactive Service Hub, I now have a new form in here, a new informational form that is directly associated with the interactive experience. So I'm going to customize this just like I would customize any other form in the application. Now, the behavior is going to be a little bit different just because of how it's being rendered, but I'm going to realistically customize this just like I would customize any other scenario. So again, I've got my name, my owner information, I've got my header information, so I've got the same kind of stuff that I had worked with earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll drag over into here. I'll go ahead and I'll drag loan type into my header. I'll switch back into my body, and just for time purposes here, let's just go ahead and add applicant social security number, date, loan amount, and that'll work for now. Now I'm going to add one new section into this, so I'll insert another section. And in this other section, I will just go ahead and add the address, city, state, and zip. Now, the key thing that I want to show you over here is this related section. So this is specific to Interactive Service Hub, and what this allows us to do is this allows us to display related information, much like subgrids and items that we've done in the past, but display it in a little bit different presentation format. So for example, I'm going to click in this related section and I'm going to add a subgrid. And so the first thing that you're going to notice in here is it's going to say, okay, well, it's going to bring in this concept of tabs. So when you're bringing these items into this related area, you're actually going to use image icon files to navigate to those particular elements. So I'm going to go ahead and just pick an image icon here. I'll just go ahead and use this, this arrow option. Then I can determine, just like I did for any other subgrid, what I want to work with. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on my activities, and I'm going to choose contacts so I can look at my co-applicant information just like we saw before. My label is going to be co-applicant. And then my name in this situation, we'll just call this Just like I configured before, I now have the capabilities to go out and do things like the view, what view is going to be associated with that, how I want charting options, all of that. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and then I'm going to open it back up. The one thing that you're going to notice that's a little bit different here is I don't have this concept of controls. So because this isn't transferring over into the mobile experience, I don't have the ability to do the control stuff like we saw in other scenarios, which basically means I can't do editable grids inside the interactive experience. I can do editable grids on phone, tablet, in the web application, but I can't necessarily do it inside the interactive experience. Now, if I had additional items that I wanted to bring into this related pane, I could now go ahead and add maybe another subgrid associated with this, define what specific item I want to work with. Here we'll just use another different icon. This time we'll do activities. We'll call this activities. Loan application activities, and then OK. So I just keep kind of building this stuff inside the related area. Now, just like I would do with any other version of this, if I wanted to, I could go up and add a new tab. So in this case, I'll create a one-column tab. I'm going to call this address info. And then I'm going to take this address section and just drag it into here and delete this. So I'm still designing it exactly the same way I would design any other element inside the application. So now I'm going to go ahead and save this and then publish this form. Now, before we view this in the other part of the application, let's go ahead and we'll talk a little bit about dashboards here in the next demonstration. The final piece to the customization story when it comes to Interactive Service Hub would be the actual interactive dashboards themselves. So if I go into dashboards, remember that in a previous module we actually created kind of a sample regular dashboard. Now maybe we want to create more of an interactive dashboard for the interactive experience. So here I can actually go up, click on New, and I now have an option for Interactive Experience Dashboard. And when I click on it, it's very similar to what we saw in that entity demonstration we did earlier. The difference here now is I actually have two options. I have more of a multi-stream option and I have a single stream option. This is where I can actually work with kind of more different tile-based situations. Let's first just do kind of the multi-stream option, much like we did before. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on the two-column overview. I'm going to go ahead and hit Create. And so in here now, again, I'll just kind of call this sample multi-stream. I will base this off of some different entities that I'm working with that have been enabled for the interactive experience. In this case, we'll just go ahead and do account. We'll use the accounts, my active accounts, and we'll filter this based upon accounts that were created on this week. Again, I can add my visual filters. So these are all the different charts that I would be able to filter down. So we'll go ahead and do accounts by industry. And if we have another one in here, we'll pick that one. Let's say new accounts by month. Then I can come down into my streams and I can add a stream. I can either base this stream off of a view or I can base this stream off of a queue. In this case, we'll go ahead and we'll base it off of a view. In this case, I have different record types associated with it. So in this case, we'll go ahead and use the account entity and we'll do accounts, my active accounts. I could then, if I wanted to, I could add another stream within this concept. If I had enabled it for those other streams, I can now go ahead and maybe in this case choose case and do my active cases. And you just kind of build these streams as needed. So you'll notice there's not a lot of customization that comes into them, but it's very powerful from within the application. So as you kind of build this and decide how you're going to filter and lay this information out, once you're done, you can then just go ahead and hit save and then close the dashboard. Now I could also do another one. Let's just do one more interactive one. Let's do a single stream on this one, and let's go ahead and do a 3-column overview, and we will create this one. And again, on this one, just for purposes of working with stuff, we'll do the case entity. We'll call this sample single. And then in here, I could pick what view I want to use. We'll use my active cases. And then I could add kind of my individual kind of streaming options into here that I would want to work with for different cases and different items as far as those options go. Again, maybe we'll just do active case by agent. One more here. And then save and close. So you just build these dashboards out kind of as needed. Once everything is ready, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to publish all of my customizations, and this is going to push out all of my interactive service hub customizations. Then I can go ahead and kind of reload this back into the application. So we'll finish publishing this, then we'll pop back into interactive service hub, and that will reload all of my customizations based upon the fact that we made metadata changes. So I'll give this just a sec here to go back into settings and interactive service hub. We'll let this load. So now that I'm back in, one of the things that you'll see, if I come over here to where my dashboards are, I will now see kind of my sample multi-dashboard. So this is that dashboard that we created inside our customization tools. So I can see the two streams that we added, the one for my active accounts and the one for my active cases. I also can click on the filter option here, and this is where I could drill in and filter each one of these down based upon the account entity that we specified when we initially created that dashboard. And I would also have my single stream option in here that I could work with as well. Now the other thing that you'll see in here is if I come up into here, I will now see loan applications. And when I click on loan applications, I can see all of the loan applications that were added in. I also have the capabilities to click on my dashboard option and now see these specific tiles and areas that we brought into here. So here's the stream that we associated specifically with the loan application. Now I could drill into each one of these options and now see what that form looks like from inside the application. So this is where I would now be able to see the related records as I've added those options in, as well as records that were associated with the timeline. And then here's those tabs that we brought across. So here's that address info tab that displays my address information. Now I want to show you that related concept on a little bit different scale just because it just shows a little bit better. I'm going to go back into cases and I'm going to open up a case. This is that related option. So as you can see here, I can see the related cases that are associated with it. When I added those different subgrids and I defined those images, what I was basically doing was giving myself the capabilities to see this type of stuff. So this is what you would see with that related scenario. So instead of having all of the subgrids display right on top of each other, I have little different button elements that allow me to connect specifically to those individual pieces. And so this is a very common scenario where you might see kind of the related information. This is that case option that we brought in earlier, that subgrid that has, or that quick view form that has the general information around those options. So these are just some of the ways that you can customize the interactive experience to meet your specific needs. A couple other final thoughts on interactive dashboards. When we talk about interactive dashboards and the interactive experience, we're really talking about creating these types of things at a solution level. So you can only add interactive dashboards through solutions. There's no concept of personal interactive service hub dashboards. So you can't go in and just create a personal one. They have to be done within the context of a solution. Now, realistically, they're just normal dashboards inside the system. So the other thing that's nice about that is just like any other dashboard that we've talked about, I can go in for those dashboards and I can associate those with specific security roles, so those dashboards inside the application are only going to be able to be viewable based upon people who have those security roles. And as you saw in the demonstration, we can create both single and multi-stream dashboards. The only thing to remember is multi-stream dashboards don't include tiles. Tiles are more of a single stream functionality inside Interactive Service Hub. Now, just a couple of other things, realistically, these are normal customizations. So you have to publish your customizations just like you always have in the past. You also, once you publish those customizations and somebody loads into Interactive Service Hub, they will typically be asked to download the newest metadata, just like if they were working on the mobile application. Sometimes the first time that you're going in there, you might be prompted to allow additional storage on your machine. That is part of Interactive Service Hub. If you don't allow it to cache additional storage on your local machine and you don't click yes, the Interactive Service Hub functionality may not actually load correctly. So you do just need to make sure that if you do ever get prompted for that, that you allow that to be brought into that situation. But realistically, all of those customizations and items that you make to entities and all of those changes that you made through those solutions will transfer from one environment to another environment, just like if you were working with normal customizations. So the customizations that you make for Interactive Service Hub inside one solution will transfer over into another environment once you import them into that new environment. When you're looking at implementing Interactive Service Hub for your organization, it's a great way, particularly if you have a service-based organization, to be able to provide just a different look and feel for your data and allow your users a more dynamic way of interacting with that information as you're moving forward. The big things to remember when you start talking about Interactive Service Hub is you do have to customize each one of those individual situations a little bit differently. So you want to remember that even though it is specifically targeted at this point at service-related information inside Dynamics 365, you certainly can go in and enable it for custom entities. Just make sure that when you do enable it for custom entities, that you go in and adjust your fields accordingly and add your specific filtering options around the fields. Make sure you go into the dashboards that were specifically created for that entity inside Interactive Service Hub and customize those dashboards, as well as going into the interactive experience form and customize that form, including how you want to work with tabs and related data. By going in and making all of those individualized customizations and then pushing them out from a publishing perspective, it's really going to help your Interactive Service Hub experience to be much more customized and tailored to what your specific organization will need as you're moving forward.